The first trial against Sanchez's corruption is ready for a verdict. Let's begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a new special late-night edition of Medidas Cautelares. Because I just got back from the Supreme Court trial of the Coldo scheme, and finally, after the whole month of April and part of May, we can say that it's now ready for a verdict. That's what the president of the court, Andres Martinez Arrieta, said at around 9:20 at night. And now let's go over the key points of this last day of the trial. It was very exciting. A lot of things happened, so you can't miss the video. We're going to tell you all about it next. And by the way, if you haven't done it yet, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel. We're almost at 129,000 subscribers, and you know our next goal is to reach 150,000. Let's get to it because there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to talk about. As you know, as we mentioned here on Medidas Cautelares, there was a certain tension in the air regarding the prosecutor's office. As I told you, the Attorney General, Teresa Peramato, had ordered the Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor, Alejandro Luzón, who is the prosecutor handling the Coldo case, in the Supreme Court, not to request a reduction of the 7-year prison sentence that the prosecutor's office itself requested before the trial for Aldama, for crimes of criminal organization and a continuous bribery offense. Just as we also reported here on Medidas Cautelares, well, what they told us is that the Chief Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Alejandro Luzón was weighing, considering using Article 25 of the Prosecutor's Statute. That is, I have to obey my superior's order, because the prosecutor's office is a hierarchical institution and the Attorney General of the state, Teresa Peramato, is the one in charge, and her subordinates have to obey her orders. But Article 25 of the Prosecutor's Office statute says that even though they have to follow the order, they, in their oral presentation, in their final report presentation, have the right to say and express what they consider appropriate. And we already expected that Luzón would publicly disagree with that order from Peramato not to reduce the sentence, because Luzón was indeed in favor of lowering the sentence, to request a sentence reduction for Victor Daldama. You already know that in the end, the one who has to decide is the Supreme Court, but the prosecutor's office, as a party, as the prosecution, can urge it, can request it, just as the private prosecution has done. It happened during the closing argument by the anti-corruption chief prosecutor himself, Alejandro Luzón, when he, in a subtle way, let's say in a simple manner, without making much noise, said that he thought a very strong mitigating factor could apply to Victor Daldama. That is, to reduce Victor Daldama's sentence request by up to 2 degrees because of his remorse and his cooperation with justice. And furthermore, he reinforced this argument by stating that obviously, if a person helps to clarify certain facts, to dismantle a criminal organization, and then doesn't receive any kind of reward, well, what this would lead to is that next time the code of silence would prevail. And honestly, I totally agree with that. There was another statement from Luzón that for me was a bit more controversial, because he said, we don't know if he was also following orders from Perama or if that's just what he thinks. Well, he somehow contradicted Aldama when Aldama said the other day that if there was a hierarchy in the criminal organization, the number one was Pedro Sánchez. Well, today Luzón said in his closing statement that when it comes to hierarchies, he didn't see Pedro Sánchez as number one, but rather José Luis Ábalos. How should we interpret this? Well, we don't know if he received an order from Peramato or not. I don't think so in this case. I think it was Luzón's own contribution. Maybe he just doesn't consider Pedro Sánchez to be the number one in the criminal organization. Honestly, I don't know if in this part of the Coldo case it can be maintained that he is specifically the number one. I would say yes. But of course, in all the cases, in all the investigations, they have a common factor, which is Pedro Sánchez. And for me, of course, Pedro Sánchez is the number one. In my opinion, I'm not a prosecutor, judge. But in my opinion, Pedro Sánchez is indeed the head of this criminal organization, which is the Socialist Party, which is the government of Pedro Sánchez. And of course, for me, he is. That was the statement by the chief anti-corruption prosecutor Alejandro Luzón. Then the lawyer for the People's Party's private prosecution, Alberto Duran, spoke. Honestly, he gave a very good statement, and Alberto Duran's statements have been very good throughout all these sessions of the trial. And he even paid tribute to the prosecution itself, saying that there are still honest prosecutors who don't stain their robes with the mud of the road, referring to the famous phrase by Candido Conde Pumpido about staining the robe with the dust of the road. So he gave Alberto Duran that nod. And he also pointed out to Alberto Duran that while thousands of Spanish citizens were dying, there were other people who were stealing and getting rich. Then it was the turn of Aldama's lawyer, José Antonio Choclán. The remarkable thing about José Antonio Choclán was the direct reference he made to the court. Following the line set by Luzón, he said that, indeed, if there is no reward for those who cooperate with the justice system, then the code of silence will prevail, because then it's not worth it for you. Aldama has risked his life and physical well-being and is under a death threat. He was even shot at in his car. And of course, if after cooperating with the justice system and helping to open new lines of investigation, there is no kind of reward, so what's the point of risking your life, incriminating yourself in crimes, admitting to what happened, and helping to open new investigations? Well, it wouldn't be any use, would it? And also, there was an important point made by Choclán, Aldama's lawyer, because he goes so far as to say that it wasn't Aldama who corrupted Ábalos and Coldo, but that there was already a criminal organization created in 2014-2015 and that Aldama just joined that criminal organization. After José Antonio Choclán, it was the turn of the other defendants' lawyers. That is, we are talking about Leticia de la Hoz, lawyer of Coldo Garcia, who spent almost 2 hours and 15 minutes delivering her closing argument, and Marino Turiel, the lawyer of Ábalos. Both have asserted the innocence of their clients, questioned the USO reports, and so on. What was most interesting was when it was time for the final statements. The final statement, well, as the saying goes, it's the final word. Well, they weren't really final words, they were final statements, because it's worth mentioning that Aldama didn't want to use that final statement term, but Coldo and Ábalos did. And Coldo spoke for more than 20 minutes and Ábalos for more than half an hour. What did Coldo Garcia say? Well, he said that his life has been destroyed, that the media have ruined him professionally, personally, socially, everything. He has emphasized his collaboration with the Civil Guard for 27 years. And then, well, I found it very interesting, he made an accusation against the Popular Party's lawyer, saying that he had offered him a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating and lying, etc. He implicated the lawyer of the Popular Party there. And then I found something very interesting, because he was talking about how the devices hadn't been returned, the electronic devices, the mobile phone and so on, and that's why he hadn't been able to defend himself properly, etc. And then he started naming several ministers. He mentioned Felix Bolaños, the current Minister of Justice, María Jesús Montero, the former Minister of Finance, Fernando Orlán de Marlaska, Minister of the Interior, and Ángel Víctor Torres, Minister of Territorial Policy, and said, "Back in the day, I helped all of them, and yet now they've sidelined me, just like they did with Ábalos." And then he let the following slip, which I personally interpreted as a veiled threat to the ministers. He said, "But well, everything in its own time, this has only just begun, and there are still many things to fix." That's what Coldo Garcia said, and it lingered in the air. And then Ábalos arrived, and Ábalos continued playing the victim, just like in his statement. I'm telling you, Ábalos' final statement lasted half an hour, and well, Ábalos. What he basically said is that there's been a trial by media, he criticized the UCO, he criticized the Dama. By the way, Coldo did the same thing. And what Ábalos said is that a witch hunt has been mounted against him, not because of the allegedly illegal actions, but because of who he is, for being José Luis Ábalos. And he has been playing the victim a bit more. And then he also criticized that the Dama was the head of the criminal organization, and yet now he gets off scot-free because he chose the easy way out, etc. Anyway, those were the final statements. And then, at 9:20 at night, the president of the court, Andrés Martínez Arrieta, declared the case ready for sentencing. He said the trial is over and now we just have to wait for the Supreme Court's decision to find out the sentences for Abalos and Coldo and also for Dama, and see whether a mitigating factor is recognized and the requested sentence is reduced by 1 degree, or whether a very strong mitigating factor is recognized and the sentence is reduced by 2 degrees. That's it for this special edition of Medidas Cautelares. I hope you enjoyed the summary. You can become a member at the chosen tier for under €3 a month or at the supreme tier for under €7 a month. You can also make your contributions via Bizum at 627556370. Sorry I'm posting this video so late, but it's right after the trial ended. I have a commitment to all of you and I didn't want to stop doing this and keeping you informed. Every day, always on Medidas Cautelares. The most important thing, as I always tell you, is that this information reaches everyone because information is power. See you soon. See.